Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our coverage of the latest mission from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. I'm Will Robinson Smith for Spaceflight Now. Be providing our commentary for the duration of this coverage, broadcasting here from the Spaceflight Now News Bureau at NASA's Kennedy Space Center here in Florida. I'm joined on this fine evening by Stephen Young, who is running our graphics, and Adam Bernstein, who is out in the field manning the cameras. If you're joining us for the first time today, welcome. SpaceX is targeting its second launch in less than 17 hours. Taking a look a little bit closer, this is pad 39A here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. As you can see, the countdown clock here at the press site continues to tick up. T plus 16 hours, 34 minutes, 20 seconds and counting. Reason for that, if you were not with us this morning, this is the count up timeline from the launch of the Crew 7 mission back at 3:27 a.m. Eastern Time this morning, 0727 UTC. We'll talk a little bit more about that mission in just a bit, but things continue to go well. You can see on the flagpole there, just below the American flag, that is the crew mission patch for the Crew 7 team of astronauts, one cosmonaut, now bound for the International Space Station. We'll have a little bit more on timeline and how things are going and what time they're supposed to dock. Come up to that in just a little bit here, but let's turn our attention back now to SpaceX's second launch targeting tonight. This is the Starlink 6-11 mission. Right now you're taking a look at Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. SpaceX is attempting to launch another batch of Starlink V2 mini satellites this evening. Currently at T plus 1 hour, 2 minutes, 38 seconds and counting. If you'd like to support our coverage of the space program, if you please hit the like button, click subscribe so you get notifications when new videos are posted. Ring that bell, of course, to do so. And that way you don't miss any of our live streams, like the two now that we've had today. And if you could share that stream, that would be wonderful as well. Help more people find this coverage and everything else going on with the channel. There's a lot happening in space these days, as a lot of you most likely know. And of course, we can't do these launch broadcasts without the support of viewers like you, if I may pull a little PBS verbiage there. Also powered by our membership. So thank you to everyone who has become a YouTube channel member and to our viewers for helping to support our coverage. Another way to do that and engage with our programs is by making a YouTube super chat. If your comment is appropriate, it can be read and incorporated into our conversation and broadcast here. It's a great way to see what you all are thinking about in terms of the broadcast, the launch opportunity, what's going on with space exploration in the larger sense, because there's a lot going on here. As mentioned, this is the second launch of this day. We were here at sunrise. We're back with you at sunset. It's just one of those days. Also, membership grants you access to our special members-only videos, as well as discounts at our online shop. That is shop.spaceflightnow.com. And for those of you who have enjoyed the Crew 7 mission, we also have the Crew 7 mission patches available at our shop. Right now you're taking a look back at pad 39A on the left-hand side of your screen. This is not live, but this is when the Crew 7 mission launched back earlier this morning. You notice, unlike the booster on the right-hand side of your screen, booster on the left, pristine and white, B1081. This is the moment of liftoff at 3:27 this morning as the Crew 7 mission got underway. Seen by thousands around the Space Coast. A lot of people enjoying seeing those four crew members, 3 astronauts, 1 cosmonaut from Roscosmos, heading up to the International Space Station 2 of them for their first mission to space, 2 of them making their second trip up to the orbiting outpost. This is also the most international crew of the commercial crew era, led by NASA astronaut Jasmine Mugbelli, making her first trip to space as part of the Turtle class of astronauts that began their training back in 2017, graduated in 2020. A number of them have flown. This is Jasmine's first flight. That crew is set to dock at the International Space Station just a little before 8:40 a.m. Eastern Time on Sunday morning, the 27th. That is when contact and capture with the International Space Station will happen. Hatch opening ceremony will happen a couple hours later, and they'll be greeted by their crewmates on board the space station right now. The members of Crew 6 will share a 5 or so day handover, and then they'll return for a splashdown off the coast of Florida at a site yet to be determined. The date also potentially slightly in flux. Of course, they'll keep an eye on the weather, the wave height, and a number of factors that are in consideration when it comes to returning astronauts back down to Earth. In fact, we had a chance to speak with a member of the commercial crew program during our live coverage last night, Sam Testa, who is the NASA Recovery Director, and will work with Crew 7 when they come back after 6 months, but is also now very busily preparing for the return of Crew 6. So we had a great conversation with her last night, got a little more insight into all the hard work that happens to make sure that crews returning back from their time in space have a safe journey back down with splashdown, and of course, heading back to their families. Now T-minus 57 minutes, 53 seconds and counting. Little under 20 minutes now from the point in which the launch director will give their go for the start of propellant load for tonight's launch. SpaceX is running the countdown for this Starlink mission from its Hangar X site here at Kennedy Space Center. It's the place where they refurbish their Falcon boosters and then prepare them for flight once again. The overnight launch of the Crew 7 mission was the first time, actually, that SpaceX has managed a crewed launch from that site. They've done a number of Starlink launches, other commercial missions from there in preparation, and did a number of trial runs to make sure that everything was up to snuff to have a safe crew launch from there, and everything went off pretty smoothly. SpaceX also has support for this launch in part from their control room at their headquarters in Hawthorne, California. Again, tonight's launch is targeting a T0 currently of 9:05 p.m. Eastern. That's 01:05 UTC. If needed, prior to fueling, they also have 3 more backup opportunities that start at 9:56 p.m. Eastern. That's 01:56 UTC. Opportunities last until 11:04 p.m. Eastern. That is 03:04 UTC on Sunday morning. But if for whatever reason all those opportunities don't pan out, they do have 4 backup chances on Sunday, August 27th. Those start at 8:40 p.m. Eastern, last until 10:39 p.m. Now T-minus 56 minutes, 12 seconds and counting. Taking a peek at the live chat, want to thank the nearly 800 of you who are joining us tonight. And for Roseanne DeVasto for your $10 super chat with a thanks for the coverage. Well, thank you, Roseanne, for being a part of our coverage tonight by chipping in with a YouTube super chat. A couple rocket emojis and a smiley face. We are all in good spirits here as it is a good night for launch. Speaking of which, why do I say it's a good night? Well, because of the weather. If you can't tell with that dark blue sky, gonna dip on down to a more black shade as we get further on in the evening. But the weather tonight, pretty ideal for a launch. 45th Weather Squadron has a launch forecast with only 5% chance of violating weather, which is quite good. Certainly seeing that right now in the shot here on your screen. Camera's being managed by our Adam Bernstein, doing a stellar job out there, swatting mosquitoes and giving us live pictures. That being said, if for whatever reason, again, if SpaceX is not able to launch tonight, the weather does deteriorate just a bit with the backup launch opportunities tomorrow. Chance of violating weather on Sunday does tick up a little bit to 20%. T minus 51 minutes, 22 seconds and counting. As the timeline is progressing well out here, let's go ahead and give you a look ahead at what that timeline will look at in full. Coming up at T minus 38 minutes, the SpaceX launch director will give the go for propellant load at the end of the go, no go poll. Assuming that go is given, propellant load will begin at T minus 35 minutes with a couple of events. Kerosene will start loading onto both the first and second stages of the Falcon 9 rocket, as well as liquid oxygen, or LOX, starting to flow aboard the first stage. T minus 16 minutes, liquid oxygen will start flowing onto the second stage of the Falcon 9 rocket. Before that, though, we'll see a nice visual indication of the so-called big vent coming from the strong back, the launch pad, as the feed lines continue to be chilled. At T minus 7 minutes, the chill down of the 9 Merlin engines gets underway. That involves flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and the turbo pumps. It's important because that helps protect those engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. At about 6 minutes before launch, the first stage of the rocket, that kerosene tank should be full. Then at T-minus 4 minutes 30 seconds, we'll see the strong back retraction begin. That starts with the clamp arms opening up. You see just below the payload fairings, that little metal extension coming just below there. That is one half of those clamp arms. Those will open. And then the strong back will begin to retract just a little bit away from the Falcon 9 rocket. And we'll stay there until liftoff, at which point the strong back will pull back much more quickly, moving away, clearing space for the Falcon 9 to leap off the pad. In about 2 minutes, liquid oxygen should be completed loading onto the rocket, at which point the Falcon 9 will be fully fueled with 1 million pounds of propellant. Then in the last 60 seconds, the control of the countdown will be handed over from ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers. The propellant tanks will be brought up to their appropriate flight pressure. SpaceX director will give their go for liftoff, and then if everything is going according to plan, the engine ignition command will be issued at T-minus 3 seconds, and then if everything is still going well, all engines, all those 9 Merlin engines are healthy, they will ignite. The flight computer will give the command for the hold down clamps to release, and we'll have a launch at T0. And again, just as a refresher for the top of that countdown, as we just wrapped up, we're now about 10 minutes away from hearing the results of the go, no go poll for the start of propellant load. If SpaceX does get underway with the start of fueling, that will commit them to launching the rocket tonight at 9:05 p.m. Eastern. If they decide to hold off on that, again, they do have a trio of backup opportunities tonight and a quartet tomorrow. T-minus 47 minutes, 42 seconds and counting. T-minus 45 minutes, 35 seconds and counting. Just taking a peek at the live chat right now. I want to thank the 1,500 plus of you that are joining us now live here as we get closer to the second launch today for SpaceX, this being the Starlink 6-11 mission here. And also want to thank Jacques Merle for becoming a channel member at the pad leader level. Thank you so much, Jacques, for joining us here on our YouTube channel and supporting our coverage of the space program. We really appreciate all of our channel members who not only have access to member-only videos, but also are able to enjoy 4K views of this launch. So if you don't happen to be in Florida in view of the liftoff coming up in less than 45 minutes now, you can go ahead and take our stream, pop it up on your TV at home, and enjoy the views from the comfort of your couch. But for those who are here in Florida and want an opportunity to see the launch themselves, well, of course, it matters which direction this mission is going. So let's take a look now at the trajectory for tonight's Starlink mission. Right here, you're taking a look at a satellite view of Slick 40, Space Launch Complex 40, over at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. As where the rocket is sitting now, you see it live on the right-hand side of your screen. There it is on the map, and when it launches, it will head in a southeast trajectory. After launch and stage separation, the first stage, unlike this morning where we had a land landing and the booster returned back to Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, tonight the booster will land, as it does most often, out in the Atlantic Ocean on one of SpaceX's drone ships. Tonight, they're using Just Read the Instructions. The booster will land on that drone ship several minutes after launch and then return back to Port Canaveral to be reflown on a later mission. And we'll talk a little bit about this booster's history coming up in just a little bit later in the broadcast. But as you can see on the live pictures on the right-hand side of your screen, it's got a little soot to it, a little bit of life. It's because it has flown to space before, but we'll get into those details later. T-minus 42 minutes, 38 seconds and counting. We'll also mention that the payload fairings at the top of the rocket that are encasing the Starlink satellites will also be recovered by one of SpaceX's recovery ships. Those will also be brought back to Port Canaveral, where they'll be refurbished and reflown as well. Now, less than T minus 39 minutes and counting, we should be hearing the results of the go no go poll for the started propellant load coming up in just about 1 minute. Now, T minus 37 minutes, 4 seconds and counting. Want to give a very heartfelt thank you to Artemis for your $100 super chat donation. Says, keep on rocking it with the science, guys. Well, thank you, Artemis, for helping us to keep on keeping on.
Tanks are venting in preparation for propellant load.
And as you just heard, we do have the tanks getting prepped for the started propellant load. That sets up in just about a minute and a half for both liquid oxygen and RP1, the rocket grade kerosene, starting to flow onto the Falcon 9 rocket. Locks on the first stage. And RP1 as well. Again, really appreciate all of our supporters here, especially those who are able to help us with our coverage of the space program. So again, thank you so much, Artemis, for helping us to keep our coverage going and help us expand it, since there's a lot going on. So really appreciate all of you who are here tonight and helping to support us. And
Team is full complete. All load and launch.
while super chat donations are very much welcome and very much appreciated,
CRLD and approval burn the countdown for urgent issues affecting the safety of the operation. Operator shall call hold countdown net. Launch control will abort the launch auto sequence immediately and proceed to the launch abort sequence. Last 10 seconds, launch control be hands off, relying on automated criteria for the remainder.
And you just heard the launch team just going over the standard procedures for aborting the mission, calling the triple hold in case the need arises at some point later in the count. As I was saying, though, while we certainly do appreciate our channel members and those who are able to help support us financially with a YouTube super chat donation, just putting in a like for this live stream as well as sharing the channel's broadcast. Also very, very helpful. Helps more people find our coverage as we are.
Auto sequence has started.
Now about 3,000 of you here joining us live. So thank you so much for spending part of your Saturday evening with us. Or for those of you elsewhere around the world, perhaps it is your early Sunday morning. A T minus 34 minutes, 26 seconds and counting. Now T-minus 32 minutes, 19 seconds and counting. Starting to see a little bit of vapor forming on the bottom of the first stage of the Falcon 9 rocket as both LOX and RP-1 are flowing in. Things proceeding smoothly with the count so far, so we are trending towards a good liftoff of the Falcon 9 on the Starlink 6-11 mission coming up at 9:05 p.m. Eastern tonight. 01:05 UTC for folks watching around the world. T-minus 27 minutes, 34 seconds and counting. As propellant load continues, SpaceX has said on X that they are good to continue with proceeding towards liftoff tonight. Noting again that the weather is 95% favorable and systems are in good shape for that liftoff at a T0 time of 9:05 p.m. Eastern, 01:05 UTC. So we are gearing up to mark another double launch day for SpaceX. Appreciate the more than 4,000 of you who are joining us for our coverage tonight. So thank you so much for either being with us for a second time today, or if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. And to those who help support our coverage with super chat donations like Artemis and most recently SG with a $3 super chat donation with a happy pair with what looks like a sweatband going on. Appreciate you helping support our coverage of the space program. Talking a little bit about the vehicle launching tonight. This is SpaceX workhorse, the Falcon 9 rocket. Seeing a little bit of venting as fueling continues towards the bottom of the first stage, so let's go ahead and talk about the vehicle en masse. Overall stands about 70 meters or 229 feet tall. It's about 3.66 meters in diameter or 12 feet. Most of the rocket is consisting of the first stage, the bottom 2/3 there. This particular booster has flown twice before, making its third flight tonight. This booster is tail number 1080. We'll have a little more on its flight history coming up in just a bit. And even though it's only flown a couple of times, it's got quite the pedigree. So we'll talk a little bit more in detail shortly. But the first stage of all Falcon 9 rockets are those 9 Merlin engines, which you see in the graphic on the right-hand side of your screen. As we've talked about the fueling process, the first stage burns a rocket-grade kerosene and liquid oxygen, producing 1.7 million pounds of thrust. Around that engine compartment, you can see the black carbon fiber landing legs used to land most first stages on either a drone ship or at a landing site. Of course, if more power is needed for the customer, SpaceX can fly an expendable version of either the Falcon 9 or Falcon Heavy rockets. A little bit higher price point, though. T-minus 24 minutes, 4 seconds, and counting. Moving on up the rocket, we've got the inner stage here. This is a composite structure consisting of an aluminum honeycomb core surrounded by carbon fiber. That image there on your right, you see those deployable hypersonic grid fins. They are titanium winglets that help provide stability and steering for the Falcon 9 as it careens back through the atmosphere, headed toward either the drone ship or the landing site. At the top of the inner stage are 3 mechanical latches. It was important because at first stage main engine cutoff, or MECO, high pressure helium is used to release those latches for automatic pushers, ensure a clean separation of the stages. The second stage engine nozzle also housed inside the inner stage adapter until stage separation. Speaking of the second stage, upper stage of the Falcon 9 powered by a single Merlin engine, also known as a Merlin vacuum engine or MVAC engine. It has the large nozzle you see at the bottom on the graphic on the right-hand side, optimized for burns in the vacuums of space. It happens to produce more than 200,000 pounds of thrust. The second stage MVAC engine will be fired twice a day on this flight to place those 22 Starlink V2 mini satellites into their intended orbit. The MVAC engine burns the same propellant mix, that being kerosene and liquid oxygen, same as the first stage. It will also ignite a third time after those Starlink satellites deploy for a deorbit burn, driving the upper stage back into the atmosphere. Will burn up, helping to eliminate the risk of space debris on this and future missions. Obviously something that, as more and more folks are launching to space, becomes increasingly important. So we are about T-minus 21 minutes, 26 seconds, coming up on the big vent in about minute and 15 seconds or so, right about the 20-minute mark, give or take. Last but not least, on the Falcon 9 rocket, in this configuration, you've got those payload fairings housing the 22 Starlink satellites. It's made of carbon composite material, about 13.1 meters or 43 feet in length, 5.2 meters or 17.1 feet in diameter. Two halves of the fairing will be recovered further down range after stage separation. It will splash down using parachutes. And they will be recovered using the recovery ship from SpaceX Doug. SpaceX has two of those vessels here in Florida, Bob and Doug, named for the first two astronauts that SpaceX helped fly up to the International Space Station, Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley. And we see at T-minus 20 minutes, about 15 seconds when it started.
Stage 2 RP1 load is complete.
As you hear the completion of Stage 2 RP1 loading, that kerosene now fully loaded onto the second stage rocket. You see the big vent there, flowing horizontally, perpendicularly away from the strong back there. So got a little bit of a breeze out here at the pad in Florida tonight. But again, weather is still 95% favorable. So we should be good from a weather perspective for a launch at 9:05 p.m. Now T-minus 17 minutes, 35 seconds and counting. We're about a minute and a half away from the start of LOX flowing onto the second stage of the Falcon 9 rocket. That coming up at T-minus 16 minutes. Fueling continues to move along smoothly as we are now approaching, looking at another countdown. 17 hours, 20 minutes, actually 17 hours, 21 minutes on the dot for the Crew 7 mission. And we are going to mark another milestone here in Spaceflight. Now we have just now officially crossed 100,000 subscribers, a big marker for any channel. And we really want to extend our heartfelt thanks and appreciation to all of you who have helped us get to this point, and for everyone who has been a part of Spaceflight Now's history in getting us to this milestone. It's been many years of hard work and engagement. I want to especially thank our leader, Stephen Young, for helping to guide us to this point and supporting us in the endeavor of covering the space program robustly and thoroughly. And
Stage 2 liquid oxygen load has begun.
With that, we see the end of the big vent. Stage 2 LOX loading beginning. So, good markers, good milestones all around. Again, thank you sincerely for all of you who are in the live chat with us tonight. Got 6,200 of you watching us live, and couldn't be happier to celebrate this on a Saturday night. Seems appropriate on a double launch day where NASA, SpaceX, and its international partners sent a crew up to the space station, the most international crew in the commercial crew program's history. And we are now 100,000 subscribers strong. And this is just the beginning. So we have a lot of great content and coverage coming up. Of course, we are only about to approach September on the calendar year, so lots to cover and discuss. Some of the big milestones coming up at the back half of this year as we approach the fourth quarter. Of course, we have NASA's Psyche mission to explore a mineral-rich asteroid coming up. That launch set for no earlier than October 5th at this point in time. The return of the asteroid sample from OSIRIS-REx getting ready to return in late September. Psyche is going to be one of 2 Falcon Heavy launches that we're expecting on the back half of this year. And of course, the SpaceX launching on an average of once every 4 days. They will certainly keep us busy, have a lot of coverage to bring to all of you, and many, many more things beyond that. It's not just launches here at Spaceflight Now. We try to give you robust and thorough coverage of the space industry writ large, both launches and exploration. So thank you for being with us, as we are now T-minus 14 minutes, 6 seconds left in the count to the launch of the Starlink 6-11 mission. T-minus 13 minutes, 40 seconds and counting. You can still see some of those vapors forming around the first stage of the Falcon 9 rocket as fueling continues on track. You may have noticed, though, just to the left of the Falcon 9, it, from this perspective, looks like it's leaning against it. We assure you it's not, but there is a crane off in the distance here at pad 40, and there's a good reason for that. As we see over at pad 39A, where the crew access tower stands now, allowing for missions, both crew and cargo, using the SpaceX cargo vehicle. SpaceX and NASA are working on having redundant capabilities here at Slick 40, building a similar tower. Structures are in the work over at SpaceX's Hangar X site right now. Following the launch of the Crew 7 mission, we had the opportunity to talk with both NASA and SpaceX officials about that. Here's part of our conversation. I asked them specifically where things stand with the tower construction and when we might be able to see it being used in support of a crew mission. Here's what we heard from SpaceX's Benji Reed and NASA's Steve Stitch.
Great. Thank you. It's a great question. Just the context, of course, is that we're working on adding the capability to fly Dragon missions from Pad 40. That's bringing it back to Pad 40, right? Because that's where we started from, which is pretty cool. And that, we're looking at bringing that capability online, towards the end of this year, early next year is where I think we're aiming for. The bottom line, though, is that it'll always be a great backup option and sort of a relief valve, if you will, from a manifest viewpoint. So if for whatever reason, we need to manage a priority Dragon mission, and we've got a conflict on Pad 39A, or for whatever the reason we're not able to fly out of 39A, then we could use Pad 40. As you probably notice on our manifest, Pad 40 is a real workhorse pad. That's where a ton of our launches are going out of. So the ultimate goal would be to continue what we do. But you're also probably noticing that we're flying more missions out of 39A, especially Falcon Heavy missions. So it'll be nice to have that as a backup or a relief valve. But currently there's not a specific mission to target to say, oh, we're going to fly this specific mission out of 40. We'll see when it comes up to when we need it. But we've been working closely with NASA and our internal teams to make sure we have that capability ready.
And I would say from my perspective, I went over to the hangar earlier this week and got to see a lot of the segments for the tower. SpaceX has done an incredible job of getting those segments together. I think you'll start to see it look a little bit like a crewed tower pretty soon here toward the end of this calendar year. Once the pad is built out, we have the crew access tower there, then we have from a NASA perspective, we have a certification process we have to go through for the various components on that pad for the crew access tower, the crew access arm, and then the various systems on that pad, which are a little different than 39A. And we'll be working through that with SpaceX later this calendar year and then into next year. And then, as Benji said, when we'll look at the manifest later on, and it'll be great to have that capability. I suspect we'll start. One good thing is not only can we fly crew Dragons from there, we can fly cargo Dragons for Joel as well. And I suspect we'll start with the cargo flight on the NASA side. We haven't really picked out which one that will be yet, but we'll start with the cargo flight, and then if we need to later on, do a crew flight.
T-minus 9 minutes, 46 seconds and counting. Again, that was NASA's Steve Stitch with the Commercial Crew Program, as well as SpaceX's Benji Reed with their human spaceflight program. Giving us a little bit of update on the progress of that tower over at Pad 40. Again, they called it the workhorse pad for SpaceX. It does far and away the lion's share of its launches. Now T-minus 8 minutes, 37 seconds and counting as we're approaching 9 o'clock here on the East Coast. Talked a little bit about the countdown for the launch of the Starlink 6-11 mission. Let's talk about the timeline for once it leaps off the pad at Slick 40. What does that timeline look like? Let's take a look-see, shall we? Of course, at T0, that is when the Falcon 9 rocket will launch off the pad. T plus 1 minute, 12 seconds. The rocket will experience the greatest point of pressure known as max Q. T plus 2 minutes, 30 seconds. That's when the 9 Merlin engines at the bottom of the rocket will cut off for first stage main engine cutoff, otherwise known as MECO. About a few seconds later after that, stage separation. First and second stages will separate in quick succession. And then 7 seconds later, T plus 2 minutes, 40 seconds, we'll see that MVAC engine spring to life. SES-1, second stage engine ignition. T plus 3 minutes, 7 seconds, the payload fairings will jettison. And as we're talking about the countdown or count up, pause for just a second as we should hear the call up for the start of the Merlin engine chill in just a few seconds here. So we'll pause to listen in for that.
Engine chill has started.
And you hear that good call up. Continuing in the launch timeline on here at T plus 6 minutes, 13 seconds, we'll see the engine burn of that first stage making its way back down toward the drone ship in the Atlantic Ocean. Just read the instructions on deck tonight. And at T plus 8 minutes, 5 seconds, we'll see the landing burn begin, preparing the way for it to touch down on the drone ship. And at T plus 8 minutes, 28 seconds, it will securely land on the drone ship. And again, it'll be brought back to Port Canaveral for refurbishment. SpaceX has so far launched and landed a booster at maximum 16 times, are the two flight leaders, those being boosters tail number B1058 and B1060.
Stage 1 RP1 load is complete.
And here are the call out for Stage 1 RP1 loading complete as we are nearing the end of fueling for the Falcon 9 rocket. Last but not least will be the completion of the liquid oxygen, the LOX, on the first stage. Continuing with the count up, T plus 8 minutes 44 seconds is when we'll see the second stage engine cutoff, SECO 1. Bit of a gap there in events. T plus 54 minutes 7 seconds is when the Merlin vacuum engine will spring back to life. SES2, the second stage engine restart. That'll last for exactly 1 second. And that'll set up the last coast phase before Starlink deployment of those 22 Starlink V2 mini satellites at T plus 1 hour, 5 minutes, 15 seconds. It's worth noting here that tonight's launch will mark an important milestone for SpaceX as they are continuing to expand their internet constellation with Starlinks. They will launch their 5,000th Starlink on this mission tonight. That's set to launch in less than 5 minutes.
Falcon 9 tanks are pressurizing for strong back retract.
And you're the call out for tank pressurization, strong back retract, about to start shortly. Coming up in just a few seconds, we'll see those clamp arms opening at the top of the transporter erector, and then that strong back will lean 1.5 degrees away from the Falcon 9, where it will remain in that position until liftoff in now 4 minutes and 20 seconds from now.
Strong back retract has started.
And you see here on your screen those clamp arms opening up to begin the strong back retract. The TE, the transport erector, will start to lean away momentarily from the rocket, preparing it for a launch. And you see it start to shift away right there on your screen. And here's a little bit of a better view of that construction crane, as we were mentioning, and that both Benji and Steve were discussing preparing for the tower construction. We should see that tower start to go vertical toward the end of the year. SpaceX is going to have a couple more cargo flights to the International Space Station, one of their Cargo Dragon, as well as now that the Antares rocket with Northrop Grumman has had its last flight in its
Stage
current
1 LOX load is complete.
configuration, then we'll see SpaceX launch the Cygnus spacecraft to the International Space Station as well. T minus 3 minutes. Two minutes, 43 seconds left in the count. We're approaching the completion of liquid oxygen fully flowing onto the Falcon 9. Fueling should be wrapping up in less than 30 seconds from now. Countdown proceeding well, and we are looking good for a launch, second of the day for SpaceX. both here right from Florida Space Coast. And taking a quick peek out the window here at the other countdown clock that we're looking at, it is T plus 17 hours, 36 minutes, 14 seconds, and counting up into the Crew 7 mission as they are cruising toward catching up to the International Space Station. That coming up on Sunday morning.
Stage 2 LOX load is complete.
Hear the call there for the completion of Stage 2 LOX loading. Falcon 9 now fully fueled, preparing for flight in about a minute and a half. And you see some of that venting continue as we are continuing on track for flight tonight.
Ground gas closeouts.
Another good call up. Now T minus 1 minute, 15 seconds and counting to liftoff. Now less than a minute left in the count. As you watch, as we
Falcon
get
9 is in startup.
close to the launch of this Falcon 9 rocket, take a look toward the bottom of the rocket. You'll see a green flash. That is part of SpaceX's engine ignition sequence using what they call T-tab.
LD, go for launch.
And we got that call out that we are go for launch in less than 30 seconds. See those Falcon 9 Merlin engines roar to life, and now 20 seconds from now. "15 seconds. Here we go. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine ignition and liftoff. Liftoff of the Falcon 9, the second launch of a Falcon 9 today. Launch of the Starlink 6-2 mission for SpaceX, sending the 5,000th Starlink satellite launch to date on its way up into orbit. Now 20 seconds into the mission. Let's listen for those roar of the 9 Merlin engines. Now 40 seconds into flight. In just a few seconds, the Merlin engines will be throttling down as the vehicle approaches max Q. Again, that is the greatest point of dynamic pressure on the vehicle. Now 1 minute into flight. Just a few seconds, we should hear a call out SpaceX's supersonic, traveling faster than the speed of sound. Getting some great images. Get a call out for max Q at T plus 1 minute, 24 seconds into the count. Adam Bernstein keeping a great track on the camera. So we're now more than a minute and a half into flight. Falcon 9 approaching 3,000 kilometers per hour, an altitude of about 23 kilometers. Now, 2 minutes into the flight, we are approaching the point known as main engine cutoff, or MECO. It's when the 9 Merlin engines will shut down, followed by stage separation a few seconds later, and we'll see the ignition of the upper stage, that Merlin vacuum engine, coming up shortly. Call for good trajectory track now about 2.5 minutes into flight. We should see those engines come down to a single point of light. There we go. Stage separation in a moment. And then ignition of that Merlin vacuum engine momentarily. And you see a stage separation there. The Merlin vacuum engine will be coming to life. Here's our live tracking cameras of... Oh. And you see on the left-hand side of your screen as the first stage engine starts its return back down to Earth shortly. Great view of the curvature of the Earth, and T plus 3 minutes, 38 seconds into the flight of the Starlink 6-11 mission. You're seeing a little bit of a plume effect from that Merlin vacuum engine as it continues its ascension. About to reach speed of about 9,000 kilometers per hour, an altitude of about 120 kilometers. Meanwhile, the first stage beginning to slow down a little bit. You can see there the speedometer and the telemetry track on the left-hand side of your screen. We're now about 4 minutes, 15 seconds into the flight. Less than 2 minutes will be coming up on the entry burn on the first stage. It's a clear night. There's a chance we may be able to see it with our tracking cameras, but it's not always a guarantee. We know Adam's out there doing some good work keeping track of everything, so if he can see it, I know he'll do his darndest to bring it to us. Meanwhile, he is still keeping a good eye on that second stage engine burn. You see the dot there at the center of your screen. That is the MVAC engine on the second stage of the rocket. Now T plus 5 minutes, 4 seconds into flight. That second stage traveling close to 12,000 kilometers per hour right now. First stage has passed its peak altitude. Now continuing its arc down to the drone ship. Just read the instructions. Now T plus 6 minutes into the flight. We're just a few seconds away from the start of that entry burn on the first stage.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
And you'll see that on the left-hand side of your screen, the Merlin vacuum engine on the right.
Stage 1 FTS has safe.
And the call out that FTS is saved. That is the flight termination system. Part of the safety protocol.
Burn shutdown.
And it looks like a good entry burn on the rocket there on the first stage.
Stage 2 FTS has safe.
Coming up on 7
Both
minutes into
vehicles
flight.
continue to follow nominal trajectory.
In just about a minute from now, the first stage landing burn will begin at T plus 8 minutes, 5 seconds into flight. Both first and second stages following nominal trajectories. And you can see the trajectory map here on your screen, both the path of the first and the second stages.
Stage 1 transonic.
You hear the call out for stage 1 transonic, now slowing to below the speed of sound. Again, it will land on the drone ship. Just read the instructions, which will come into view shortly as we're now T plus 7 minutes, 53 seconds and counting up. That entry burn starting now in less than 10 seconds. There we go.
Stage 1 landing burn.
Start of that landing burn.
In terminal guidance.
The drone ship should start to come into view in just a matter of seconds here. Burn lasts about 20 seconds, and you see there's the drone ship.
Stage 1 landing leg deploy.
Good views of that as the landing legs are set for landing. And we
Stage 1 landing confirmed.
have a clean touchdown of booster tail number B1080, making its third flight up and back to and from space. As we are continuing on with the second stage, moving at a nominal trajectory at T plus 8 minutes, 54 seconds and counting.
Seco.
Here the call out for Seco happened real time about 8 minutes, 44 seconds into flight. At this point, the
Nominal parking orbit.
second stage will continue in that parking orbit until T plus 54 minutes, 6 seconds into flight, when that Merlin vacuum engine will reignite for exactly 1 second. Setting up for the deployment of those Starlink satellites at T plus 1 hour, 5 minutes, and 15 seconds.
Expected loss of signal Bermuda.
T plus 12 minutes, 28 seconds into the flight of the Starlink 6-11 mission. We did mention that this is the third flight of that first stage booster. Of course, it is no longer at the pad. It is now on a drone ship heading back to Port Canaveral slowly but surely. But I did want to mention what the pedigree of this booster happens to be. So let's turn the clock back a little bit before we got to tonight's liftoff. Take a look at the booster history for tail number 1080. It made its debut on a crewed mission, that being the Axiom 2 mission to the International Space Station, the second private astronaut mission, back on May 21st, 2023. And again, it only had a little bit of soot because it's only flown twice before tonight. Its second flight was to launch the Euclid telescope. That was on July 1st, 2023. And in fact, if you want an opportunity to learn a little bit more about Euclid, we had the opportunity to get an up-close look at it while it was still in the clean room here on Florida's Space Coast. Members have the ability to watch that video right now on our YouTube channel. Again, it's in the members only section. You can also go back and watch the live launch replay of Euclid to hear more detail about that as we were doing live commentary on it at the time. T plus 14 minutes into flight. And now, of course, Booster 1080 can add the launch of its first Starlink mission onto its roster. Starlink 6-11 that we saw lift off, a spectacular launch. Second of the day for SpaceX. 14 minutes, 21 seconds ago. And again, as we did state earlier in the broadcast, crossing 100,000 subscribers to the YouTube channel here. Just a fantastic feed, a testament to the hard work of all the people here at Spaceflight now who've helped make this happen over the years. So thank you to everyone who's had a hand in making Spaceflight now what it is. And thank you to all of you who are watching us live, who have been avid readers of our content on our website, spaceflightnow.com. Those who follow us on social media, both here on YouTube, as well as some of our other channels. That includes Twitter, now X, as well as Threads. Lots more to come here on the Space Beat. SpaceX launches about once every 4 days. Obviously, doubleheader today, keeping things busy for all of us here in the realm of space coverage. Next launch of the calendar year here in Florida. Not SpaceX. Actually, we're going to see the Atlas V launch from United Launch Alliance, ULA. Not too far away from the pad that we've just been observing tonight over at pad 41. That is Slick 40, where the Atlas V currently launches and where soon ULA's Vulcan rocket will launch. In fact, company CEO Tori Bruno tweeted out a photo of the updated Centaur 5 upper stage of the Falcon, or excuse me, of the Vulcan rocket. That'll be transported down to Florida, integrated with the first stage of that rocket, the Vulcan booster, getting ready for its first certification mission. We've been talking a lot about the moon these days. Lots happening on the lunar surface. Of course, Chandrayaan 3 from India just landed successfully. Russia's Luna 25 made the attempt, unfortunately made a hard crash landing, but the moon is the hot ticket in town. Japan is getting prepared to launch its own lunar lander. That mission set to take off Sunday evening from an Eastern timeline perspective. And of course, coming back to Vulcan, that'll launch potentially as early as the fourth quarter with Astrobotic's first lunar lander, the Peregrine lander, carrying a suite of scientific instruments But turning back to the Atlas V, that's launching on August 29th. It's coming up this Tuesday here local time. Launch is set for no earlier than 8:34 a.m. Eastern, 12:34 UTC, again from Slick 40. This is the 18th and final mission that ULA will launch, supporting the National Reconnaissance Office, the NRO, before it starts flying national security missions using Vulcan. This is the NROL 107 mission, also known as Silent Barker, with the opportunity to be there for the rollout of that rocket. Got some more content on that coming to the channel soon, as well as the website, so keep your eyes peeled for our coverage of the Silent Barker / NROL 107 mission, as we've got a busy few days leading up to that soon. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's go ahead and talk about the place of this particular mission that just launched tonight. Just about 19 minutes into flight, you're seeing the trajectory on your screen. Let's talk about the mission stats and where the Starlink 6-11 mission now falls in line for SpaceX. As we were just talking about, this was the third flight for that booster, tail number 1080. It's the 249th Falcon 9 launch to date for SpaceX, 55th Falcon 9 launch of 2023. 58th orbital launch so far of the year. This was the 140th SpaceX orbital launch from Pad 40, as you heard a little bit earlier, Benji Reed talking about that being their workhorse pad. As you can see by the numbers, it's been quite busy over the years. It's the 195th overall orbital launch from Pad 40, so coming up on the big 200, which will certainly be hit before the end of the year if all continues to go smoothly. And this was the 44th orbital launch from Cape Canaveral, that being both launches from here at Kennedy Space Center as well as Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. So the Space Coast remains busy as ever. Increasingly busy, as a matter of fact, year over year. And since I happened to overlook it at the time, I want to give appreciation to those who help support us on this channel. I want to thank Alan Gable for your $20 super chat. Alan, if you're still around, really appreciate you helping to support the channel at that level, and for all of those who have offered super chat donations throughout the duration of this and other broadcasts. Again, it is a big part of helping to support what we do here at Spaceflight now, bring you live coverage for all the launches here from Florida Space Coast, as well as supporting other missions around the world. It's a busy time in space, so we always enjoy those who are able to help support us financially, but we also really appreciate those who just take the time to be with us, pop into our live streams, join us in the live chat. The community that is built here at Spaceflight now is fantastic to see. There's a lot of great discussion about the missions currently flying that we are happening to do a live launch for, as well as things that are happening in space as well. So keep that conversation going. Thank you to all of our moderators in the live chat for keeping things kosher. Certainly helps keep the flow of conversation going in a good and productive way, because we want to make sure everyone has a good time talking about space. So thanks to our mods like Stephanie B, who's always coming in clutch for us. As we're T plus 22 minutes, 25 seconds into the flight of the Starlink 6-11 mission. Of course, SpaceX not the only one in the satellite internet game, and especially ones who are hoping to have a large internet constellation. In fact, the first launch of Amazon's Project Kuiper internet constellation coming up exactly 1 month from today. No earlier than September 26th is when ULA confirmed to us on Friday that they are targeting for the launch of that mission. Launch time still TBD at this point, but of course we'll update you as we learn more about that flight. But they are in the process of getting their first internet satellites up into orbit. Those 2 demonstration satellites were intended to fly on the certification mission for ULA's Vulcan rocket. However, with delays to that, they decided to shift their plans. Amazon had purchased 9 flights on the Atlas V for deployment of their Project Kuiper satellites, and so they opted to use one of those to fly these demonstration satellites. At this point, we have asked and have not been told whether or not Amazon is intending to fly its Project Kuiper satellites still on the Vulcan certification mission, if they're still part of that mission manifest. It's certainly a possibility, but not something that has been confirmed as of yet. So we will keep you posted on updates with that, since they were originally going to be a part of that mission as well. Now T plus 24 minutes, 16 seconds into flight. Just want to give you a reminder of where we are in this mission. In addition to the timeline, what's left, well, less than 30 minutes from now, at T plus 54 minutes, 6 seconds, we'll see that Merlin vacuum engine come back to life for a 1-second burn, setting up the second stage for Starlink satellite deployment at T plus 1 hour, 5 minutes, and 15 seconds into the mission. And now SpaceX has 2 missions currently in flight right now. You see the Starlink trajectory on your screen, but also the SpaceX Crew Dragon capsule carrying the 4 souls of the Crew 7 mission heading up to the International Space Station, also very much en route to their destination. Things continue to go well with that flight. Docking set for just before 8:40 a.m. tomorrow morning, as a matter of fact. Capsule that is making its way to catch up to the ISS is number C210, otherwise known as Endurance. It was named by the astronauts of the Crew 3 mission, which launched back in November 2021. It flew one other time, supporting the SpaceX Crew 5 mission, the first time for the commercial crew era that NASA and Roscosmos, the Russian space agency, formalized the seat swap agreement in this commercial era of spaceflight. That mission flew cosmonaut Anna Kikina, who at the time was the only female cosmonaut in SpaceX, or in Roscosmos's core of cosmonauts. And there is one other Dragon that is, one other Crew Dragon that is currently used, that is C206, Crew Dragon Endeavour, which is currently docked to the International Space Station, having flown the Crew 6 team up to the ISS. They're getting ready to close out their time on orbit, make their trip back to Florida no earlier than September 2nd, after a handover about 5 days with the Crew 7 team. Once they arrive, they're busy making accommodations, readying for their new crewmates to join them on station. Bit of a class reunion, if you will, for Jasmine McBelly, who is commanding the Crew 7 mission. She'll join her classmates of the so-called Turtle class of astronauts. They were candidates in 2017 became full astronauts in 2020. Frank Rubio and Woody Hoberg, both on orbit right now, both turtles of their own right. And excited to continue what Crew 3 Commander Rajachari lovingly called the turtle takeover of the space program, as now a majority of the turtle class of astronauts have made their first trip up to space, still a few yet to fly, but more and more of them earning their astronaut wings every year. Now T plus 28 minutes, 25 seconds into count. T plus 31 minutes, 55 seconds and counting. Taking a look at the trajectory map of the upper stage of the Falcon 9 rocket as it continues on its pathway before deployment of the Starlink V2 mini satellites. Coming around the Horn of Africa, just off the tip of South Africa there, as it's continuing along its pathway. We're just a little over 20 minutes away from the second stage engine coming back to life for exactly 1 second. Just a little brief burn there. SES-2, second stage engine start. Setting up for Starlink satellite deployment, 22 Starlink V2 mini satellites at T+1 hour, 5 minutes and 15 seconds. Again, this batch will tip SpaceX over the 5,000th mark as far as the number of satellites it has launched to date. Taking a peek at the live chat. Appreciate the roughly 1,800 of you who are still sticking with us as we roll on with our live coverage. Chris on command, you are correct that, well, the next launch from the Space Coast, as I think you corrected yourself, is ULA's Atlas V rocket, launching in a 551 configuration, supporting the NROL 107/Silent Barker mission. This is the 18th and final national security launch that ULA will have using its Atlas rocket. Before they start flying national security missions with their upcoming Vulcan vehicle. They do have to fly 2 certification missions before they are able to start flying Vulcan for national security purposes, though. That first certification mission is currently targeting no earlier than the 4th quarter of 2023, launching the Astrobotic Peregrine lander to near the moon's south pole, continuing a string of moon-bound missions that we've seen in calendar year 23. Now T plus 35 minutes, 30 seconds into flight. I know not everyone that's still sticking with us. We got about 1,700 of you still joining us live. Perhaps some of you may have missed the launch live as it was happening. And if that's the case, we do have the replay for you, or if you're just eager to see it one more time, let's go ahead and look back. This is the launch of the Starlink 6-11 mission, leaping off the pad from Slick 40 over at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Again, for those of you who are just popping in and wondering what we're watching right now, this is the replay of the Starlink 6-11 launch from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, Pad 40. This is about a minute and a half into the flight here. On the right-hand side of your screen, you're taking a look at the live trajectory map of the second stage following MECO and stage separation, which you'll see coming up on the replay on the left-hand side of your screen. Again, this is not a live launch. You're seeing the replay of the launch of Starlink 6-11. Did have a question in the live chat. You may have noticed there was a little bit of green flash as the Merlin engines started to come to life. That is what's called T-Tab. It is part of SpaceX's engine ignition sequence. It is the spark that allows the ignition process to move forward. Adam doing another stellar job of tracking this launch for us, and you see MECO there on your screen, main engine cutoff. Momentarily you'll see stage separation, and there that little dot on your screen, that is the Merlin vacuum engine powering the second stage in this replay of the Starlink 6-11 flight. On the right-hand side of your screen, that's where the second stage is now on our pale blue dot, sailing past the tip of the African continent. You can see Madagascar there, a little bit north of its position. It's around T plus 39 minutes, 14 seconds into flight. Got a nice little plume effect from the second stage engine there. Not quite as pronounced of a jellyfish effect as we sometimes see, but that's all right. SpaceX noting in real time that it does have that one additional burn, SES-2, coming up shortly. Starlink satellite deployment is targeting 10:11 p.m. Eastern. T plus 43 minutes, 58 seconds and counting as we are approaching the second and last burn of the second stage before satellite deployment. We are also in the midst of the Crew 7 mission, now 18 hours, 22 minutes, 27 seconds and counting into that flight. I want to go ahead and reintroduce you to the 4-member crew flying aboard that mission. The most international crew of the commercial crew era so far, led by NASA astronaut Jasmine McBelly. Here's a look back at part of our conversation with her before she had her first flight to space.
Jasmine McBelly serves as the commander of the Crew 7 mission, her first flight to the International Space Station. She dreamt of traveling to space as a child and even dressed as the first woman in space for a 6th grade book report at her elementary school in New York.
In my mind, as I remembered it, I really looked like an astronaut. And it was really funny when I got selected and I was like, oh, let me see if I can find a photo of that. And I looked back and I was like, it looks more like a beekeeper outfit.
Years later, McBelly traded in that cosmonaut costume for a space camp jumpsuit and eventually a Marine uniform. She racked up more than 2,000 flight hours in more than 25 aircraft and flew more than 150 combat missions. She says her time as a helicopter pilot helped her when she was assisting on the Human Landing System program. That will be the version of the SpaceX Starship that will bring humans to the surface of the moon during the Artemis 3 mission.
It's things that we learn as helicopter pilots, how to do landings with, we call it brownout situation, where the dust is blowing all over. So the Apollo astronauts experienced that. They experienced a lot of the same visual illusions we see in helicopters.
2017 was a big year for her. That was when Major Jasmine McBelly became an astronaut candidate. As one of 13 members of the so-called Turtle class, she trained rigorously until graduation day in 2020. Now she is leading a fully international crew into orbit, with each seat of the SpaceX Crew Dragon spacecraft representing a different nation. McBelly herself will become the first professional Iranian-American astronaut to fly to space.
Anytime we are adding diversity to who is flying in space, I think we're opening the door for a future generation, for more people to believe they can do this as well.
2 of McBelly's biggest fans will wish her well on her journey to space. Her 2 twin girls, Estelle and Zelda. She hopes her story will not only inspire her daughters, but kids around the world while she's circling it.
When you say you want to be an astronaut in 6th grade, people go, yeah, okay, but they don't think you're actually going to become an astronaut. So it's pretty cool to look back and see that, there have been many years in between then and many places and many things going on, but to have ended up here where I initially dreamed is pretty incredible.
And that was part of our conversation with NASA astronaut, commander of the Crew 7 mission, Jasmine McBelly. T plus 47 minutes, 14 seconds into the flight of Starlink 6-11. You're taking a look at the count-up clock as well here at the press site at NASA's Kennedy Space Center at T plus 18 hours, 25 minutes, 38 seconds in front of the pad that they left from, Launch Complex 39A. And you can see the flag with the emblem of the Crew 7 mission patch flapping in the wind just below the American flag there. We're just about 6 or 7 minutes away from the start of that second stage engine burn, SES-2. That'll last exactly 1 second. As an update on the progress of the Crew 7 mission, now about 18 and a half hours into their flight. Colleague at CBS News does report that one of 3 GPS navigation units on the Crew 7, or the Dragon that they're flying, GPS number 2, is providing what was described as, quote, spurious data that is currently being analyzed by SpaceX engineers. However, they only need one GPS string to work for docking to the International Space Station, so they do have backup capabilities even with one potentially not giving back great data. But speaking of the Crew 7 mission, we reintroduced you to one of those members, T plus 49 minutes. Let's talk about the pilot, ESA astronaut, Andreas Mogensen, who flew on his second mission now to the International Space Station.
Sitting in the pilot's seat of the Crew 7 mission is Andreas Mogensen, an astronaut from the European Space Agency representing Denmark. He was the first Dane to become an astronaut as a member of ESA's 2009 class. But before his first space flight in 2015, he underwent extensive training all around the world. That included 2 missions with NASA's underwater lab near Florida called NASA Extreme Environment Mission Operations, or NEMO.
NEMO was a great tool, training tool to prepare for my first flight, because living in an underwater habitat is very similar to living on board the space station. You have the same focus on safety in terms of atmosphere, in terms of the way you work.
Mogensen's extreme environment training also took him underground through ESA's week-long cooperative adventure for valuing and exercising human behavior and performance skills, also known by the acronym CAVES.
We have this idea that the Earth is solid beneath our feet, but some places on the Earth it's just full of caves, long tunnels, and getting a chance to explore that and just see this completely different world, I think it's very, very valuable for lunar missions and probably also Mars missions in the future.
His first trip to space was a relatively short 10-day mission aboard the ISS, but this time around, he'll be there for half a year.
Last time I could exclusively focus on science and technology development. This time I'm going to, have to be part of the, performing maintenance and repair, doing some of the logistical work when cargo vehicles arrive and depart, and hopefully also get a chance to work with the space station robotic arm and maybe even participate in an EVA or a spacewalk.
Mogensen says a 6-month mission in space will not only bring new opportunities, but also some hurdles back on Earth too.
So certainly it'll also bring some other challenges, especially, the time away from my family and my children. They are 4, 6, and 9, so for them 6 months is really a long time. I mean, their lives can change a lot in 6 months. So that's going to be a challenge, definitely.
But the challenge also comes with unique opportunities. Mogensen is the first non-American astronaut to pilot a SpaceX Crew Dragon. Not only that, while on station as part of Expedition 70, he will also become the space station commander. We spoke with Frank Davina, the head of the European Astronaut Center in Germany and ESA's ISS program manager, who just so happened to be the first European space station commander back in 2009. Andy, he says, will do a great job.
He's very well respected by his crewmates, by NASA, by the entire team. So he has also served a lot as a role as a Capcom, lead Capcom, crew increment manager in NASA. So I think he has had a number of responsible positions in the space program, in the ISS program. So today I don't need to give a lot of advice anymore to Andy. I think I can more take advice from him than I have to give to him.
And that is the pilot of the Crew 7 mission, the first non-American to pilot
Acquisition of signal, Western Australia.
a SpaceX Crew Dragon spacecraft. And you hear the call out for acquisition of signal as we are approaching the second stage engine second burn, SES-2, coming up at T plus 54 minutes 6 seconds. Now just a little over a minute away from now.
orbit.
And you hear the call out for that nominal deploy orbit. It was a 1 second burn of that second stage engine, which has come and gone now. T plus 54 minutes, 38 seconds into flight. We are now just over 10 minutes away from the deployment of those 22 Starlink V2 mini satellites. And if you're wondering what that deployment process looks like, you're taking a look at some video from the first time SpaceX launched those Starlink V2 mini satellites. Again, this is footage from the first time those were deployed. You're seeing the camera mounted to the boom arm that drifts away from the satellites. Different deployment procedure from the Starlink version 1.5 satellites prior to this. This one keeps all of the mechanisms used to deploy the satellites together in one piece as opposed to multiple pins, decreasing the amount of potential orbital debris that is generated from these Starlink launches as there are ever more of them increasing. You see the trajectory there on the right-hand side of your screen, passing over Australia toward the Philippines. Tonight's deployment will be including the 5,000th Starlink satellite to head to orbit to date. SpaceX has many more of these planned in the future. Speaking of plans, the Crew 7 mission continues to go mostly according to plan. Did bring you that update about one of the GPS systems on board.
Expected loss of signal, Western Australia.
But otherwise, things going well with the flight of the Crew 7 mission heading up to the International Space Station, carrying 4 souls on board. T plus 1 hour, 46 minutes into the flight of the Starlink 6-11 mission. Coming up on deployment in less than 5 minutes. That'll bring up the end of the primary mission here. One more burn following satellite deployment of the Falcon 9 upper stage to deorbit it. And that'll bring our coverage tonight for a wrap. Our second launch coverage of the day. It's been a busy day here for Spaceflight now. But what a way to spend a weekend.
Acquisition of signal, Guam.
T plus 4 minutes, 6 seconds into the flight. You heard that call for acquisition from the ground station in Guam. Now, exactly 1 minute away from Starlink satellite deployment. SpaceX is not providing live views of what satellite deployment will look like in real time, but again, this is video of what that process does look like with the Starlink V2 mini satellites as they all deploy away as one group and then will separate over time and move to their own respective orbital positions. Now about 15 seconds away from this event happening in real time. Again, what you're seeing on your screen on the left-hand side is a replay from the first Starlink V2 mini satellite deployment from SpaceX.
Payload separation confirmed.
And there we go. Here, the call out for Starlink separation. those 22 Starlink V2 mini satellites now moving away from the upper stage of the Falcon 9, which will perform one more deorbit burn itself, and then it will wrap up its mission life. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up our coverage tonight on the Starlink 6-11 mission with confirmation from SpaceX of satellite deployment. That'll go ahead and do things for this particular mission, but as you see on your screen, the count up clock continues on the Crew 7 mission as it cruises toward the International Space Station, getting ready to deliver 3 astronauts, 1 cosmonaut to the orbiting outpost tomorrow morning just before 8:40 Eastern Time. You can follow along on our social media channels. We'll have updates on Launchpad Live of crew docking, so you can see those live pictures there, as well as updates on our social media on X, formerly known as Twitter, as well as Threads throughout the event. Want to say one more time, thank you to everyone who helped us reach 100,000 subscribers here on YouTube. We can't do this coverage without the support of our viewers, subscribers, and channel members. So thanks to all of you for the contributions you've given to Spaceflight Now over the years, helping us to expand our coverage of the space program. And we're very excited for all the things still yet to come as we explore the mission of space and everything going on with it. Give you one last look up at the International Space Station right now. This is a live look at the ISS as it prepares to welcome 4 more guests up to orbit. Right now, the station is southwest of South America, as the Crew Dragon spacecraft is moving quickly to catch up for it. Again, docking and capture expected just before 8:40 a.m. Eastern Time, Sunday morning, the 27th. And that'll go ahead and do it for us tonight. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, thank you for being with us for our coverage of the Crew 7 mission earlier this morning and overnight, the launch of the Starlink 6-11 mission in the evening hours. We look forward to bringing you much more yet to come. So, for Stephen Young and Adam Bernstein, I'm Will Robinson Smith, signing off for now. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you next time.